This is an interesting introduction for me because I've been listening to Clutch since I was 19 years old. I saw Neil open up for Septura. Yeah, Florida State Fairgrounds when I was 19. And yeah, I'm dating myself, but I think they all know, I'm old. And when I first reached out to Neil to come on the SE podcast, I can only imagine what the internal conversation was, but the external conversation was like, well, I'll let you know. Don't call me, I'll call you. And then I got lucky, I hate to say it, but his album got hacked. And someone pirated it and put it online. And it just so happened that a hacker had called me previously to ask about getting him on the podcast, so we recovered the person who...
This is the first half of my speech, man.
I'm going to shut up then. No, it's not. Okay. Anyhow, this guy is awesome. And it's not just about the ILF, it's just about the way he is as a person. Everyone on the board says he's the human of the whole ILF. And he reminds us to remember about people. So first time, I think, Rockstar at DEF CON. Anyone ever hear of a Rockstar speaking at DEF CON before? I haven't either. So join me in giving a really warm welcome to Neil Fallon.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. And that's a wonderful segue to the opening, which is my question. How is it that a singer in a rock and roll band, who is by all indications the walking definition of the end user, ends up talking to you in the world's largest hacker convention? And as Chris just said, he reached out to me in an email. And when I got the email, and this is in 2013. And when I got the email, I scanned through it and I saw the word human hacker. And coming from the world of heavy metal and hard rock, I associated that with Freddy Krueger, Hannibal Lecter, because I do tons of interviews with radio stations, with TJ and Shark Boy on 106.7 The Edge, or Wailings from the Pit podcast. So I said, this is another one of those. So then I clicked on the link to Social Engineer, and I looked at the website, and I said, this is a terrible mistake. They got the wrong Neil Fallon. But as it turns out, no, they wanted to talk to me. And then for some period of time, months went by, Chris and I exchanged emails trying to coordinate a time to do the podcast. And his schedule, my schedule couldn't sync up, and that ball kept rolling. Now, this is the first time I've used a clicker, so bear with me. At that time, the band was getting ready to release a record called Earth Rocker. And we put out our own records on our own record label, and we're very cautious about giving copies to the record to people we know or don't know. So for months, I went on a website called hasitleaked.com, and I would type in my own band name with my own record in there, and for months, it said no. And I was getting very pleased with ourselves for not giving out copies. And then about, 10 days, 2 weeks before the release of the record, I put in the name of the record. I hit return, and it said, yes, it's leaked. And it had a list of places you could get the record, a list of services you could pay money to get the record off of that. And after I picked my face up off the floor and rearranged it, put it back together, I asked myself, how did this happen? I didn't do it. And then I remembered Chris, and he seemed kind of computerish. And yeah, internety. So I reached out to him. And I told him the problem. And I wasn't looking for legal recourse or wanting to take action. I was just really curious. And Chris said, "Yeah, we can do this, but you got to do the podcast." And I did keep up my end of the bargain. And we talked about smell, which we'll get into shortly. Now this is admittedly a terrible picture of our record. That's not what the album looks like in stores. But that's what was encrypted in the pirated copy of the album. And in 48 hours, Chris and his team were able to tell us the who, what, well, kind of the who, kind of the how, and the why. Long story short, there's a person, or was a person, in a pressing plant in Europe who had a relationship with a hacker group who gave a physical copy of the CD to them. And this photo is encrypted into the pirated copy as, I guess, bragging rights, so to speak, to say that they were the ones to get it first. Now, as any good hacker group or collective or individual should have, they got a credo. And that's the top of it. It goes on for quite some time. It's very spooky. It's got a Grim Reaper, and then there's another picture under that which I can't put on the screen for public consumption. But it has a, and here's a credo, and I'm gonna have to read this because that's just entirely too far away. Here it is. Do not consider this release as a substitute for the original. Consider it a way to promote new bands and check out records before you purchase them. It's a very nice sentiment. We strongly urge you to support the bands, attend their shows, and buy their merch. I can get down with all of that. And there's been plenty of oxygen spent talking about piracy, streaming, intellectual property rights. That's not what I'm interested in talking about today. But it's worth mentioning that music, for thousands of years, if not tens of thousands, has always been free. And it's only when there were certain technological developments that allowed people to monetize it. And that's cool. That's how most musicians make their money if they can. We tend to think of vinyl records, radio, 8 tracks, cassettes, even sheet music and player piano rolls as old technology. It's not. It's brand new. When you look at the span of human history, there's only been a very short time when we've figured out a way to monetize it. And one of the characters in that revolution, not a lot of people know about. And I just learned about this guy recently. And that's this dude. That's Major General George Owen Square. Now, his last name, it looks like Squire, but it's pronounced Square. And he made it a point to let the public know that. I would not want to question that dude. He's got hubcaps on his chest. He's a very interesting individual. He was born in 1865 in Michigan. He was in the Army Signal Corps. You could argue that he's a coder, or was a coder. Semaphore, telegraph. He was also responsible for buying the very first airplanes for the U.S. Army. And this blows me away. He got them from the Wright brothers, which I didn't think you could do. You could call up Orville and say, I need 3. But that's what he did. But his main contribution that revolutionized the world was in electronics. Now, I know many of you here are way more savvy in that field than I am. So this might be the first of many instances when I insult your intelligence. But his main contribution that changed the world was multiplexing. Now, I had to look that up when I was preparing this speech. In a nutshell, multiple signals over one channel. And he did it over telephony. And he patented it. And for whatever reason, the Major General Square decided to open source that technology. He gave it away. He said, it's too good to keep for myself. And wouldn't you know, a major corporation took that patent and made millions of dollars off of it. And if you adjusted for inflation, probably billions. And the name of that company was American Telephone and Telegraph, nowadays known as AT&T. They've been around since the 1870s. So when George, now we're on a first name basis now, I guess. George said, oh, hold on, wait a minute. This was supposed to be for the public, and you're making millions of dollars off of this. Why don't you kick down some funds? He wanted royalties. He went to court, and he lost. So he decided to get in the game. A little too late, frankly, but he did. And he started a company called Wired Radio. And this was in 1922, 23. And Wired Radio pumped music over telephone wires. And you can listen to it in your house on a speaker for a surcharge. It was the world's first subscription streaming service. This happened 100 years ago. It's not new. And it made sense at the time because radios were, one, expensive, unreliable, they were big, and there weren't that many radio stations. But that changed very quickly, and radios got smaller, more reliable, and the business model for radio stations was too lucrative. So he started putting his wired radio in other places, lobbies, doctors' offices, and for whatever reason, he also put them in these elevators. Now, there's two lines of argument about why music was so popular and successful in elevators. One is that people were freaked out, because at that time in America, the buildings were getting taller, or maybe people were bored. And I can buy both arguments. I've been both scared and bored in elevators. But, you know, if you look at what elevators used to look like an extra from Hellraiser, I tend to relaxing people. Rickety, loud, disastrous. And then, like I said, it also went into lobbies. And this was wired radio. Towards the end of his life, Square wanted to rebrand wired radio. It had become very, very popular and very, very prevalent all over the United States. And at that time, there was a startup company that was making bucket loads of money called Kodak. And he liked the name of that brand. So he decided to rebrand Wired Radio. And thus was born Muzak. That's where he got the name from. He just bit Kodak. Now, I don't know what the average age is in here. Maybe some of you don't know what Muzak is. Well, I will explain it to you with an analogy. Muzak is the musical equivalent to an empty jar of mayonnaise. It's got no drums, string music, usually reworked popular songs, Nowadays, Muzak mostly lives in movies and TV tropes where there's a gunfight and people get in the elevator and they have to wait and there's the music playing and everyone's uncomfortable and the thing goes ding, 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 ding. You don't hear it as much. But it was incredibly popular. I would argue that music, just as much as any other social phenomenon, was responsible for the rise of punk rock and heavy metal more than anything else. Now, Muzak tried to back up their product with science. Now, I'm not a scientist. I won't fake it. But even I can tell you that that chart is a bunch of horse hockey. The values are completely arbitrary. You can't see it on there too well. They have a type of music on there called presentation in 2/4 time with a stimulus value of 7. And at the very bottom, there's a type of music called society in 2/4 time as well. And that has a stimulus value of -1. I couldn't tell you what that means. But they put this in their brochures and their advertising campaigns, and it worked. They actually did some science. If you played Muzak for 15 minutes in a giant office space, and then 15 minutes of silence over the course of a 9-hour workday, there was more productivity. And it took off. And it became ubiquitous. Now, you may be skeptical that music can affect human behavior. And that's understandable because we all like music and we may not think it affects us any other way but our moods. So now I am going to present you with hard scientific evidence. Behold, the Chipotle burrito. Now, I don't know if food stylists get awards, but that one deserves one. If you walk into a Chipotle, what's the first thing you notice? Well, that's a rhetorical question. I'll tell you what the first thing I notice. The floors. It's poured concrete with a lacquer top. The walls are corrugated steel and tin. There's no purpose in that. It's just there. And the ceiling, there is none. It goes all the way to the roof. And they have speakers everywhere. And over those speakers is up-tempo, loud music. When I walk into a Chipotle and I stand in line and I've already made my decision what I'm going to get, by the time I'm at the end of the line, I feel like I've failed an intelligence test because I get stressed out. And that's the idea. When you sit on that bar stool that's about this big around, and that music is echoing around that reverb chamber, and this only applies to Chipotles that are built by design. If it goes into an existing space, this doesn't apply as much. But that music is bouncing around. You're going to eat that burrito maybe a minute faster. Doesn't sound like much, but at the end of the year, all those customers and all those tacos and all those bowls, that's millions of dollars that's coming in that door and out that door. Now, I don't know if Chipotle, I'm talking about burritos, and now I got to have a drink of water, sorry. I don't know if Chipotle uses Muzak. It doesn't really matter. It's the idea behind it. One of the things that, let me back up. Muzak still exists, but it's owned by a company called Mood Media. And what Mood Media does is they'll put like an LED screen by the Bath and Body Works that has a beautiful couple drinking Chablis by the seaside, and you might associate that with that product. They also do music, and they do scent. And I'm going to go on a tangent here for a second to go back to the podcast we did and talk about scent. If you go into a women's department store or the side of the department store that's targeted towards women, it might smell of lavender and vanilla. You won't notice it, but it's there. And then you go to the men's side, it smells like leather and cigars. You may not notice it, but it's there. In fact, it's happening right now. You may not notice it, but there's a chemical going in your nose and into the oldest parts of your brain. In 1991, the Mirage here in Las Vegas started putting scent into their air conditioning system. Then all the other, not all of them, but a good number of the casinos that could afford this started following suit. And it became so pervasive that professional gamblers started rating these scents. The most popular is Mandalay Bay. It's tropical. It smells like escape. And the least favorite, according to professional gamblers, is the MGM Grand, which they've given it a name. It's called Desperation. Now, and it's happening right now here in Caesar's Palace. The name of the scent here in Caesar's Palace is called Empire Gardens. If you like it, you can buy it. You can put it on your neck and your wrist, and you can smell like this place if you're so inclined. But what that's doing is associating a place or a product with the deepest, oldest parts of your brain. And it doesn't take a whole lot to do that. Now, in a casino, and I'm sure many of you have heard this about the way casinos are designed, no windows, confuse you, the patterns on the carpet. But I noticed the music. If you go to the the slot machines, the music that gets played on a slot machine is very brief, but it's up-tempo. They want you pulling that arm or pressing that button as quickly as you can. And if it means, just like Chipotle, that you do it just a little bit faster, cumulatively, by the end of the year, that means millions of more dollars. On the other hand, if you look at the high-stakes poker tables, those are almost always in a little enclave with a low ceiling to protect itself from the sound. Maybe there's a lower tempo music. They want you to sit in that seat for as long as your bank account can take it. There's two different psychologies, and it's based on music. And that's what I'm here to talk about. I'm finally got that out of the way. I'm no neuroscientist either. Oliver Sacks was, and this is what he said about music. And this blows me away. More of the brain is involved in perception and response to music than to language or anything else. I mean, anything else? That's a broad statement. Touch, taste, smell, sight. The music, let me back up, reset. Let's talk about music for a second. We're talking about fluctuations in air pressure, in patterns. That's it. Going into your ear canals, and your brain is going to pay more attention to that than anything else? I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. I only read that a couple months ago. But on reflecting, I think Sachs is right. I'm not going to argue with the guy. Can't. But in order to kind of illustrate that, I'm going to play some music. And I'd like you to consider this as a hack. And I know that might be considered a stretch to a lot of you, But hear me out on this. Now, Chris had to walk me through how to work this laptop earlier, and something weird might happen. Escape. Okay, part 1. Oh, I can look at the laptop. I don't have to look at that. All right, that's a start. "30 seconds each of each piece of music."
Wouldn't it be nice if we were older and we wouldn't have to wait so long? And wouldn't it be nice to live together in the kind of world where we belong? No one's gonna make it that much better when we can say goodnight and stay together.
Page to tell you what y'all just did. It's very informative. The first piece of music by Georgi Ligeti. Ligeti is mostly popularly known as the composer that Stanley Kubrick ripped off and used his pieces for, when the monolith appears and you hear, Kubrick just took that, didn't even ask. And Ligeti's considered, if not the most important, one of the most important avant-garde composers of the 20th century. If you listen to that music, I would hazard a guess that many of you felt very uncomfortable. You didn't like it. I asked my 8-year-old son, what does that, I played that for him. I asked him, what does that sound like? And he said, it sounds like you're walking down an alley, you know something's around the corner, and you're walking very slowly to see what that is. So I said, well, maybe my son's been culturally conditioned. He's seen scary shows, and maybe he associates those things with scary things. So I had my sister play that piece of music for her son. He's 4. And knowing my sister, he hasn't seen anything scary yet. His reaction to that music, and he said, it sounds like skeletons. I would suggest that the reason for that is because there is no pattern. Your brain cannot predict what is going to happen next. It can't store the information the way it should be. There's a reason we teach our children the ABCs in song, is because we can teach them to associate the melody with the memory. You can't remember a Ligeti piece. Maybe he can. The vast majority of people cannot. And it makes us very uncomfortable when we don't know what's going to happen. Now, when the Beach Boys came on, a good number of you smiled. And your shoulders went down. Even if you don't like the Beach Boys, they were your heroes. Some of you even bobbed your head. And I'm going to get back to that in a minute. They overtook your motor functions. Brian Wilson. Anyone met Brian Wilson here? You have? Okay, well, you don't count. Brian Wilson, overtook your motor functions for a moment. Consider how violating that is. Then I played Frank Sinatra. And I'm going to share a story about Frank Sinatra. Never met the guy. I'm just talk about that song. We were on tour in the winter around 2000. And we were up north, and there was a blizzard. We were in a van, and our tour manager called up the next hotels down the highway. And he got the last 4 or 5 rooms. Get to the hotel, throw our bags in our rooms, and then we go down to the hotel bar, as we do. Now, this hotel bar was a square with a bartender in the middle, and it was jammed, and no one wanted to be there. Being in that hotel that night was in nobody's plans. But we made the most of it. You can't negotiate with Mother Nature. But there was this one couple right next to us. I'm sitting here. Our tour manager, Jack Flanagan's right here. And this couple couldn't believe they had to spend the evening with us. Their Christmas was the most important Christmas. This hotel was disgusting. They abused the bartender, and it really was bumming us out. So Jack says, "Watch this." And he gets up and he puts a couple dollars in the jukebox. And we continue drinking, and I ask him what's going on. He says, "Wait for it." A song comes on. He goes, "Okay, we're almost there." And then Frank Sinatra's "My Way" came on. And that couple ceased their bickering. They both looked down into their drinks. And honest to God, 30 seconds later, the woman burst into tears. The husband rolls his eyes and goes, "Oh, God." And they left. I don't think Jack ever considered himself much of a human hacker, but he designed it, he engineered the moment, and he got the desired effect. Now, going back to patterns, that's one of our most important attributes as a species, being able to predict outcomes based on experience, whether it be the paw prints on the jungle floor or the changing in the stars. Is it going to get cold soon or is it going to get hot? Do we need to go north or south? And there are many anthropologists who believe that music and human evolution happened at the same time. It's frustrating that there is no record of this. There's records of the visual arts, there's records of technology, but there is no record of our music. Because as soon as it starts, it's over. It's transient. I think the oldest musical instrument, other than drums, is a 9,000-year-old bone flute that was found in Siberia. But I would argue to you that music is code on many different levels. And check this out. If I were to give you on that screen, I tried to do it, but I'm terrible at this stuff. If I were to give you 1% of the Mona Lisa, a picture that we all are familiar with, you probably wouldn't be able to tell me what it was, unless it was maybe the corner of her lip. But the sky, her hair, her dress, you wouldn't have any clue. If I were to play you 1% of a 3-minute rock song or a pop song, for example, Billie Jean, not only would you recognize the artist, you'd recognize the song, your brain would evaluate the tempo, the melody, but more importantly, and you'd be able to tell the lyrics that preceded and would follow that portion. But more importantly, your brain would unpack the memory and emotion that comes along with that song. Maybe the first time when you hear Billie Jean to this day, you think of Junior Prom 1985. Or maybe Billie Jean was playing when you got in your first car accident. And every time you hear Billie Jean, that's the only thing you can think of. They become inseparable. And your brain unpacks that information on all those different levels instantly. I got to look at my notes. Now, there was a couple people who nodded their head when they heard the Beach Boys because they were stoked to hear the Beach Boys after Ligeti. Many of you are very security conscious. I learned that as I sat here listening to fishing calls for 4 hours today. That was so exhausting. Sitting. But unless you're going to leave a room where music is being played, or you're clinically deaf, there's nothing you can do to stop it. You can put your fingers in your ears and say, I can't hear you, but you might still hear the beat, and that might elevate your heart rate, or it might lower it down. Usually we like it. We allow it to happen. We buy a ticket for a show, we decide to put on a record. But when you don't want to hear that music, it's terrible. I'm sure many of us have been in our car and there's that one song you cannot stand. And it comes on and you punch your dashboard. You can't change it quick enough. You don't get that reaction to, well, maybe some of you do, but the majority don't get that to the visual arts. You don't see the Mona Lisa and go, oh man, I can't stand that picture. But if you hear a little bit of music that you don't like, it becomes very visceral. Now, over Clutch's career, we've played with some of the heaviest hitters of heavy metal and hard rock. Slayer, Pantera, Sepultura, Motorhead, Iron Maiden. And of all those bands I've mentioned, there was one crowd that was the most violent, negative reaction we ever received. And that was the band, that was the crowd that was in the Knoxville Convention Center when we opened for Nickelback. See, you're laughing. And I'm not dogging Nickelback, but you're thinking, oh, what's wrong with Nickelback? My mother-in-law likes Nickelback. So we got up on stage, and within 3 minutes, if the crowd had the opportunity to tear us to shreds, they would have. There was a family in the front row in the barricade, about as far as I am to you. This gentleman, 40, 50 years old, was passing out loose change to his sons, ranging in the age of 15 to 8, to throw at me. In this business, you either develop a thick skin or you go home. The more they did it, I kind of liked it. It was a challenge. Why did he have such a negative reaction? Because our music was going to the most deepest, primitive parts of his brain, and he didn't like it. It went. Your brain is processing music both on the highest functions and the most simple, primitive functions. Straight to your amygdala. See, Chris, I used the word amygdala in my speech. He had the. Thank you. That's the first applause. Amygdala? All right. Cerebellum. I'll stop. He had the fight or flight response. He couldn't flee. He was stuck there. He wanted to see Nickelback, and maybe even if he could flee, there was 1,000 people behind him. So he chose to fight, and I was the enemy because I'm the front man. And that's just because you're in front. You're the easiest target. There's another phenomena of music, two more. This one not as extreme. There's a phenomenon I see on stage when there's an individual that doesn't like our band. And there's a body language that occurs, particularly with adolescent males, when they cross their arms and they give you a look like, I'm totally not into your band. That's it. That's how they let you know. They're there to see the band after you, or the band after that. Sometimes I'll look over there, and that dude will start bobbing his head because we overrode his motor functions. And then I'll quickly look over there, and he'll stop. And then he'll cross his arms again. See, I'm still not into your band. And it'll happen over and over and over again. It's a little game I play to amuse myself. The most extreme example of music in a negative way would be enhanced interrogation techniques. It's reported that the CIA, well, they do use music, but it's reported that they use the Meow Mix jingle on loop. Now, I'd crack like an egg. I got 10 minutes? All right. Good. I even forgot the clicker. Oh yeah. Oh no, I did it right. I did it right. Thank you. One of the most awesome things about my job is the view. And when you're in a crowd, it's hard to see everything around you. One of the things I notice on the periphery of any crowd, when in the back, when you have the water, the restrooms, the first aid, the concessions, there are products for sale. And one of the things that we love about music so much is that it makes us feel good. And that's because of the dopamine. Your brain is releasing dopamine. Music is causing your brain to release dopamine. It's getting you high. People say, oh, music gets me high, and you kind of roll your eyes like, oh, wait, whatever. No, but it does. And at these festivals, it makes sense for companies to sell their wares or give away wares where there's 30, 40, 50,000 people all in one spot. But what I've noticed over the years, in the background, the biggest products for sale are mood-regulating products. Alcohol, tobacco, energy drinks, e-pens, what have you. And that's just the stuff that's above board. As everyone knows, there's a whole economy underground if you want to get really heavy. That's because when your band that you like finished playing, that's when the crash comes. And you want to keep going. That's what the body tells you. Your body doesn't like it. You don't have any more dopamine. So you walk to the back and you get a fix. I have a pet theory that one of the reasons that there's so much substance abuse in touring musicians is because musicians are getting high every night, whether they like it or not, because the dopamine is going straight to their brain. And it makes them susceptible to that. Now, how much time I got? 8 minutes. Oh, sweet. Now I never go to my on stage and say I'm going to social engineer a crowd. That's not art. And even if I wanted to, I wouldn't know how to do it. I will say this. On September 11th, we were getting ready to go on tour. On September 14th, our crew watched Manhattan burn when they were in New Jersey City. We decided to go on tour anyway. We went to Spartanburg, North Carolina, and we played the show. Before the show, the crowd was just murmuring. And that club was notorious for being riots, in the good way. But it was odd. And I got up on stage like this, and it went dead quiet. And I didn't premeditate this moment, but I said, let's rock Patriots. And it erupted in a sound I've never heard since. It was visceral bloodlust. And it scared the bejesus out of me. I did it again the next night. I did it the night after that. And I quickly realized what I was doing was using these people's compromised emotional states as leverage. And it was cheap and it was ugly to use that as a stage gimmick to elicit a response. Now, most times on stage what happens is it's very innocuous. The band says, I want everybody to make some noise, and everybody goes, ah, because the people want to interact. That was different. That was politics. And I can see how somebody could really get off on that. That was a drug like I've never felt before. And frankly, I hopefully will never be in that position again. Now, I'm going to close with one last thing. That's good. I like 5 minutes. And I tried to work this into this presentation in a smooth segue, but I couldn't figure it out. So I'm just going to jam it in on the end. How many of you know about the relationship between Apple computers and Apple records? Okay, I can live with that. Because I was really pleased with myself when I stumbled upon this next bit of information. When Apple computers started, there was already a company called Apple, and that was the Beatles record label. They had been around for a long time, and they had a lot of lawyers. Apple didn't. There was litigation, and I'll admit I'm probably going to massacre this tale a little bit, but it's worth sharing anyway. There was a sound engineer by the name of Jim Reekes, or Jim Reeks. Here it is. Yeah, Jim Reeks. And there was an understanding between Apple Records and Apple Computers that Apple Computers could keep the name just as long as they didn't do anything musical. And they agreed to it. Shortly thereafter, sound cards started getting introduced. And all of a sudden, it started getting musical. So anytime music was used in an Apple computer, it had to be cleared by the legal department. So Jim presented a sound, played it for legal department, and legal said, it's too musical. So Jim said, so sue me. Went back to his lab and made another piece of music, and he was pissed. I don't know how mad he was at the Beatles. Maybe he was a fan. He was mad at probably mostly the lawyers, life in general. I don't know. So he listened to the Beatles' last song of their last record, and he used that as inspiration. And he presented this new sound to the legal department and told him it was a Japanese thing called Sasumi. And it went right over their heads. Now, when I play this last bit of music, I'll stop, take questions if you got them. But when you've heard this song before, but when it stops and there's that little bit of a rest and there's that last note, imagine you're turning on a MacBook, because that's what this is. Jim listened to the last note of the day in a life. I think it was a G note. He put it in E, and then Mac changed it over the years, and from what I understand, they're phasing it out. But for all these years, a sound designer has been punking the Beatles and a bunch of lawyers, and every time I turn on my Mac, it makes me laugh. So I just wanted to share it with you. So, any questions? If not, my feelings won't get hurt. Yes, sir.
So your first time presenting,
You got that right.
touring. How's it feel emotionally? How's that feel different?
This is awkward. And I've been conditioned for almost 30 years to have 3 other people on stage with me. And I went back and forth with Chris for a long time. And he's like, oh, you sing in front of thousands of people every night. What's the problem? I said, well, there's no beat. And there's no rhyme scheme. And this is a blank slate. And this is a completely different animal. And going back to what Ryan was saying, it's good to get out of your comfort zone for the selfish reason of learning. And thanks for having me.